By the third night, the snow had stopped pretending. It came level out of the northeast, hissing on the lamps, and the pass over Garrow Bank shut the way a door shuts. Travellers heard it happen from the coffee room of the Swan and stayed where their dinner was. The great posting inn under the bank held 26 stranded souls that Thursday, 40 horses, and one landlady who had stretched 9 geese across 3 sittings and meant to stretch them further. Kitty Sowden was in the yard at 10:30, a lantern in one fist and a scoop of bran in the other, when she heard the north mail come in wrong. The right sound was 4 horses at a swinging trot, and the guard's horn telling the yard to turn out the change. This was a walk. Harness rings clinking slow, a wheel dragging snow, and a postboy's voice, high and scared, at the leaders' heads. They brought the coach under the arch with both lamps drowned, and Mr. Tansey roped to his own rail. 30 years on the box of the Northern Mail, and it took 3 men to unbend him from it. His hands had gone past white into a bad wax yellow, and one cheek shone hard and pale where the wind had been at it since the 9-mile stone. He was still trying to give orders while they carried him. That was how they knew he would live. The Mail's own guard lay frost-struck 2 stages south at Applegarth. So Tansey had come on north alone, carrying both offices against every rule the post office keeps. They laid him on the settle by the taproom fire. Then they set the mail itself down in the hall. 2 locked boxes, and the leather bags, letters and bank bills, and a soldier's remittances, the whole business of the North done up and sealed. It sat there with every man in the house looking at it, and then looking somewhere else. Over the bar hung the boastboard her father had painted with his own hand. The mail always went through from the Swan. 25 years he had made that sentence true off his own box. Under the board, on 2 iron hooks, hung his whip. The stock was holly, the thong kept supple with neatsfoot oil. It was dusted every Saturday and touched by nobody in the 2 winters since they buried him. Kitty stood in the hall with snow melting off her shoulders and let herself want the old small thing, the one she had wanted at 8 and at 18. 1 hour on the box, in daylight, before witnesses. Just the once. The box seat goes to whoever the horses trust, and the horses had decided years ago. Every beast in that yard left its feed to put its head over the half door when she crossed the cobbles. They had done it since she was a child on a stool with a body brush. Her father had seen it. He had told her the yard was hers and the road was his, and he had said it kindly and gone on saying it kindly until the day he died. "The mail stops here tonight," said Maddox, from the best chair at the fire, "and any man who tells you different is drunk." Maddox drove the high flyer for the rival line out of Setterby, and the high flyer stood snug in the Swan's second yard, with its horses eating Mrs. Sowden's hay. He was a big, comfortable man, and he laid his reasons out the way a peddler lays out ribbon, each one smoothed flat for the company. "There's a drift at the scar, the height of your chin. There's glaze ice the whole of the long steep, under new snow, which is the worst dress a road can wear. And there's my own team, which is worth more than the letters of every lovesick clerk in Lancashire. I'm fond of the mail. I'm fonder of my neck." "The mail is timed," said a thin gentleman in a travelling cloak, who had said it 4 times since supper. "I have bills in that bag due in Carlisle." "Then you may carry them up the bank yourself, sir, and I'll write to your widow." The taproom laughed and settled and was ashamed of itself and drank. The Duke spoke for the first time then from the corner, mildly. "What does the mail want, to go on? Name it in parts. A whip, a guard, a team, "And a fool's luck," said Maddox. "3 of those the house has," said the Duke, and went back to his glass, leaving the room to do its own counting. Kitty came through with a tray of hot mash for the settle. Mrs. Sowden held that a frostbitten man wanted the supper she'd give a tired horse, only with rum through it. The talk went on over her head, which was where talk had been conducted her whole life. The postboys were children. The eldest of the 3 was 14 and slept in the hayloft, and somebody by the door said his name and the word bank in the same breath. Mrs. Sowden came out of the kitchen with her sleeves rolled. "The eldest of them is 14, she said, to the room entire. "The man who puts that child on that road tonight will answer to me and to my griddle, in that order." The subject died. Kitty knelt and fed Mr. Tansey his mash by the spoonful, since his bandaged hands would hold rum, but very little else. "You've a light hand with a spoon, girl." "I've had practice, Mr. Tansey. You've eaten my mash before." "Have I?" "Every change you ever took at the Swan these 10 years. Who did you suppose made it to your fancy?" He was quiet over the next spoonful. "Your father always said the Yard did it." "The Yard," she agreed. "Aye, she's a hard-working lass, the Yard." She had known him since before she could see over the bar. He was one of the men her father had trained, and like all of them, he called her the girl. "Ask the girl to fetch it. The girl will know where it's kept." The girl had harnessed his change team 400 mornings and had it standing ready to the minute. The praise for it never came back with her name on it. Good lasses at the Swan. Last winter, she had sat up 3 nights with Maddox's off-leader, poulticing a cracked heel by lantern, and in the spring Maddox had bought the ostler a pot of ale for the cure. The ostler had drunk it too. There was a whole shelf of such items, entered under other names, and she had stopped reading it years since, or told herself so, kneeling there with the spoon, while the fire discussed her father's road without her. The Duke of Garrowdale sat at the corner table by the window, apart from the company. He was northbound, 3 days stranded like everyone else, and the only passenger who had made himself of use. It was the Duke who had helped carry Tansey in from the arch. He took the heavy end, the shoulders, and took orders from the ostler while he did it. The Yard had noted that with approval, and the coffee room with astonishment. Since then he sat quiet over 1 glass, listening. He was a big, plain-made man of 35, who watched the room the way a shepherd watches weather. And when the laughter went round about widows, he did his laughing into his glass, briefly, and stopped. Her father had taught her the 4 in hand in this Yard, at dawn, before the house was up. Left hand for the reins, the 4 rein ends, the points, laid between her fingers in their order, and the whip caught up neat in the right hand. Feel of their mouths, Kit. A team tells the truth through leather. And every year, once a year, she had asked for the road. And every year he had looked at her hands, and looked away. "The box is a bad place for a girl, Kit. I'm minded of your good." And she had believed him, which was the worst of it. "Somebody," said the thin gentleman, "must take that mail over the bank." "Aye," said Maddox comfortably, and put another log on the fire. "Somebody." It was the Duke who asked the useful question. He asked it quietly, of the settle, and the room fell in behind it because rooms will follow the first plain sentence they hear. "Mr. Tansey, setting yourself aside, who in this country can put a team up Garrow Bank tonight and bring it down the far side alive?" Tansey lay propped in flannel with his ruined hands on his chest, and he took his time, because 30 years on the mail teaches a man what a question weighs. "There's 1 whip in this house her father trained for it," he said, "and I've watched her hands 10 years. She's stood in that yard every morning of her life waiting to be asked. Ask her. The taproom turned. All of it, chairs and shadows and the thin gentleman with his bills, turned and looked at Kitty Sowden standing with a spoon in her hand. "No girl takes the King's mail up Garrow Bank," said Maddox, and put his boots out to the fire. Nobody answered him. That was the strange thing, Kitty thought afterwards. The room had turned ready to laugh, and the laugh had failed to come. Tansy had said, watched her hands 10 years in the voice he used for road and weather, and every man present had ridden behind that voice. "It will be a scandal from here to Carlisle," said the thin gentleman. "A woman driving His Majesty's mail." "Her father's hands," said Tansy to the ceiling. "I'll certify them." Mrs. Sowden had come to the kitchen door with a cloth over her shoulder and fright standing plain in her face. And then she did the thing the county would be telling for 30 years. She crossed behind the bar, under the boastboard, and reached up, and took her husband's whip down off its hooks. She carried it round the bar, and through the middle of the room, with her chin up and her eyes bright and terrified, and she held it out to her daughter, level, across both palms, the way one man hands another a thing that is loaded. "Your father always said the mail went through from the Swan," she said. "Go and make an honest woman of me." The fire cracked. The room stared. Kitty put down the spoon and took the whip, and her hand went round the holly grip where her father's hand had worn it pale, and it fitted, and something in her chest that had knelt for years stood up. "Then hear my terms," she said, and was surprised how steady it came. "The mail goes through, or nobody rides. I'll have my say on that at the top of the bank, and my say is final. On the box my word is the road's law, whoever is paying and whatever his hurry. No passenger goes up behind me tonight, whatever he offers. Letters can be dug out of a ditch. Gentlemen argue. And the Swan's boast stays true tonight. Those are the terms." "Granted," said Tansy, "on the mail's behalf. The whip carries both offices tonight, as I did coming up, and I'll answer to the surveyor for it." And his eyes were wet and perfectly satisfied. "And if the coach founders," said the thin gentleman. "Who answers for His Majesty's mail then, pray?" "The same one who answers if it sits in that hall till Sunday," said Kitty. "Me. That's the box, sir. The blame comes sewn into the seat. It always did." The Duke stood up at the corner table. He came forward into the light, and he did the thing that made her look at him properly for the first time. He addressed her, and let the room overhear, instead of the other way about. "You'll want a second body on the box, Miss Sowden. I'm heavy, I'm biddable, and I don't scare. It's a rough seat, Your Grace, and the pay is poor." "So is the Lord's," said the Duke of Garrowdale, "and I've kept my seat there 10 winters. Then it's settled? Then you'll do, Your Grace." She said it before the sense of it caught up with her, and the room let out its breath. By the door, the eldest postboy, 14 and furious with glory, was already running for the lamp room. "Acting escort, shovelman, and ballast," said Tansy from the settle. The horn and the waybill remained the whips. Maddox drank his mug to the bottom, set it down, and studied the fire as though it owed him money. "Kitty," said Mrs. Sowden, very low, under the noise of the room rising, "come back to me." "Before noon," Kitty said, which was the only answer that was any use, and went to change into her father's box coat. They gave her the road first, because Tansy demanded it, and a coachman's brief is worth more than a map. She knelt by the settle in the box coat with the caped shoulders, 3 sizes too broad and exactly right. Tansy gave her Garrow Bank out of his head, point by point, in the flat professional voice that 30 years had rubbed smooth. 5 things between here and Crossgate, in this order: Long Pull, First Drift, the Scar, the Summit, the church wall turn with the long steep under it. A relief guard waits at Crossgate and takes the bags on north. Long Pull is 2 mile of steady collar work. Keep them at a strong trot where the walls stand close. The road holds bare there, the wind scours it. Where the walls break, the first drift lies across, always has, always will. Hit it with the team fresh and swinging, and you'll cut most of it. The scar's your trouble. If the drift there stands over the leader's knees, stop, dig, and lead through. Waste 20 minutes to save the night. That's male arithmetic. Are you hearing me? First drift where the walls break, cut it swinging. Drift at the scar, stop and dig. Summit gate, you'll know by the wind going mad. Halt there, whatever the sky is doing, and chain your near hind wheel, and put the shoe under it besides. Belt and braces both, this night of all nights. The long steep is glaze under new snow. Keep the wheelers back in their breeching. Keep the leaders just off their collars. Downhill your leaders are passengers, mind, and passengers that can pull you into the ditch. Quarter your road at the church wall turn. And trust Barley. I know Barley. You bred him mash from a bucket when you stood this high, and he's taken the bank 200 times with your father. He'll lean in hard at the scar. That's his habit. He's feeling for the wall with his shoulder. Let him. Where Barley puts his feet, the road is. He looked at her a long moment over his bandages. Your father was wrong about the box, lass. He was right about everything on the road, and wrong about the one thing standing in his own yard. Go on. The Swan's got a boast to keep. The yard by Lamplight was all business and breath smoke. She chose her team from her mother's own change horses, beasts she had fed and dressed and doctored. Barley went to the near wheel, of course, 17 years old and deep through the girth, standing in the trace snow like a chapel. A heavy roan went beside him at the off wheel, and 2 lighter bays went in front for the lead, one honest, one green and starry-eyed with the weather. She put them to herself, calling the order, and the ostler's lads ran to her voice. The wheelers went in first, backed either side of the pole, and their pole chains hooked on. Then the breeching, the broad strap that sits round a horse's hindquarters, settled low and snug. The breeching would hold the coach off their hocks coming down the steep, and a slack strap tonight was a broken neck tomorrow. Then the leaders, traces to the bars, coupling reins buckled. Last she went down the team once with her lantern, strap by strap, bare fingers aching, slow, her father's voice in her head. The yard wins the road, Kit. The box only spends it. The Duke came out in a borrowed frieze coat with a borrowed shovel, and stood to be given work. So she gave it him. Hot bricks from the kitchen into the boot, the mailboxes strapped and sheeted and roped, the yard lantern trimmed. He did each thing quickly, thoroughly, and next to silently, which from a duke was a kind of poetry. The Green Bay leader threw her head and danced when the sheet went over the boxes. Kitty stood at her cheek, took the head down gently by the cheekpiece, and spoke to her the plain sense she'd have spoken to a nervous kitchen maid. "It's work, my lass. It's only work, and you're paid in oats." The mare's ear came round. Her foot came down, command and leather. Her father's trade, on any coachman's terms whatever. Mrs. Sowden came out with the last of the hot wine and rugs, and her fear buttoned up inside her good grey bodice, where it would stay till noon. Maddox stood under the arch with his pipe drawing, and offered his wisdom to the air. "You'll be back inside the hour," he said, "if you're lucky." "Lay a fire for it then," Kitty said, and went up the wheel to the box, and the yard saw the innkeeper's daughter gather 4 horses into her left hand. They carried Tansy to the door on a chair, swaddled in blankets, the horn laid across his lap. He could grip enough to raise it. He looked at her on the box a moment. Her father's coat, her father's whip, her own steady hands. Then he set the horn to his lips and blew the North Mail's call down the yard. Clean and bright, 30 years of road in 3 notes. The mail goes forward. "Take her out, Kitty," he called, and coughed, and blew it again. She sprang them under the arch and into the dark, and the snow took them, and the whole inn stood in the doorway lamplight looking north, and the boastboard hung over the bar with its sentence waiting to find out about itself. For the first mile the team argued, and she let them, within reason. The Green Bay leader wanted to gallop away from the snow, which is a young horse's whole opinion of weather. The roan wheeler wanted his stable. Barley wanted what Barley always wanted, which was the next 100 yards, taken properly. Kitty sat deep in her father's coat with the reins gathered in her left hand. The points lay between her fingers in their order, so that she could take a pull on any one mouth alone. She talked to them down the leather. A give here, a half-ounce of feel there, her whip hand catching the thong up out of the wind. Somewhere past the first milestone, the argument settled. 4 horses became one animal with 16 legs, leaning into the collar together, and the coach came alive under her. The road ran between dry stone walls doing their old work. They stood the snow in ridges along the lee, the sheltered side, and scoured the crown of the road bare between. She sprang the team along the bare stretches, and walked them where the white lay smooth and lying, reading the surface by lamplight and feel. Snow that glittered was honest. Snow that lay dull had water or worse underneath. Miss Sowden. The Duke had to lean close and pitch his voice over the wind. He was wedged into his own end of the box, his hat tied on with one of Mrs. Sowden's stocking strings, and he had borne the first mile in respectful silence. "What may I do?" "Sit still, hold tight, and be ballast, your grace." "Ballast," he said, trying the word. "I have been carried about England my whole life, and never once asked to pull, Miss Sowden. You have engaged the most experienced ballast in the kingdom." She laughed before she could help it, and felt the team feel her laugh. Barley's ear came back an inch, checking on the box. She steadied herself and them together. "Then keep to your trade, your grace, and I'll keep to mine. May I at least learn its terms of art? If I am to be ballast, I would sooner be educated ballast. Near side is left, off side is right. The pair in front are your leaders, the pair under us are your wheelers, and the large near side gentleman below you is Barley, who has forgotten more of this road than the 2 of us will learn tonight." "Barley," said the Duke gravely, to the broad dark quarters ahead of him, "I am under your instruction." Edgar of Garrowdale kept to his trade and watched hers, and it was the best watching of his life. He had grown up second son, second at school, and when his brother died, the title had come down to him with the fit of another man's coat. He knew what it cost to sit beside a seat all your years and be told kindly that it belonged to somebody else. So he knew the size of the thing in front of him. Here was a trade practiced 20 years in a walled yard, a mastery kept down to the size of a stable morning, and let out onto the open road at last. At night, in the worst weather in 10 years, with the king's mail behind it, and the mastery held. That was the thing he could have watched till morning. Her hands sat quiet as sleeping birds, and the team answered them anyway. When the coach shaved the wall at the quarry gate turn, she gave the wheelers a foot of room he could have sworn she measured through her gloves. And when the first drift stood suddenly across the road in the lamplight, breast high on a horse where the walls broke, she read it at 40 yards. She said one word, swinging, and sent them at it fresh and fast and true, exactly at its lowest shoulder. The coach struck the drift and burst it. Snow went over them in a wave, over the lamps, into his collar, down his boots. The team plunged twice, hauled, found the far side, and came away trotting. And Kitty Sowden shook the white off her shoulders and called out to Barley, who had leaned into it with all his honest half-ton, "Good lad, good lad." "That," said Edgar, spitting out snow, "is the most work ballast has done all winter. That was the small drift, your grace. The scar is bigger." "How much bigger?" "We'll measure it with your shovel." "Does the shovel come with the seat?" "The shovel is the seat, your grace. The rest is sitting." He laughed into the wind, and inside the laugh, privately, a thing settled in him with a click. He would be sorry when the bank ran out. The snow had eased to squalls between the walls. Ahead, the road tilted up into the dark in earnest, and the lamps lit the falling flakes so that they seemed to climb. "Your father drove this road," he said, at a walking stretch, collar work, the team's breath rolling back over them. 25 years, and my grandfather before him. From the Swan north was Sowden Road. She checked the green leader, who had opinions about a shadow. "He taught me in the yard at dawn, before the house was up, every morning from 6 years old. Then every year I asked for the road, and every year the road was shut to me, for my own good. The wind took a gap in the walls and hit them. She rode it out. You'll mind, I don't say he was unkind. He was the kindest man on the North Road. He was proud and afraid at the same time, and afraid one every year for 20 years, and then he died 2 winters back, and after that the yard was all there was. Until tonight, until Mr. Tansey got frostbit," she said, very dry, "which is a hard way to be made a prophet. The walls fell away either side. The lamplight went suddenly small in a great darkness, and the wind came at them, off a mile of open moor with its shoulder down. Somewhere ahead, over the roar, came a sound like surf where surf had no business. It was the wind pouring over the scar, and the drift under it waiting. "Now, your grace," she said, and put the whip back in its socket to have both hands free, "you may unstrap that shovel." The drift at the scar stood higher than the leaders' heads. It filled the road wall to wall, 40 feet of white lying along it, curled at the top by the wind into a smooth blue-white lip. It stopped them dead, a wall with weather for a mason. Kitty brought the team to a stand 20 feet short and set the coach square. Then she sat still a long moment, reading it in the lamplight, and Edgar had the sense to let her read. What she read was where it lay thin. The wind had packed it deep against the weather wall and let it taper along the lee, and there, hard by the lee stones, the shoulder of it stood no higher than Barley's chest. 12 feet through, by the shadow of the lip, and not much more. "Well," she said at last, Tansey called it. "We stop, we dig, we lead through, 20 minutes to save the night, and we take it by the lee wall, your grace, where it lies low. 12 feet of digging, not 40. She came down off the box, stiff-legged, and went to work in her father's order, which she could have recited asleep. Leaders out first, traces unhooked, coupling reins through, and the 2 bays handed to Edgar. He was to walk them in a ring on the trodden ground, keep them moving, keep them warm, and let the green ones see the shovel before the shovel moved. rugs over the wheelers where they stood. Barley she left in his place at the pole, and told him so, both hands a moment on his big plain head. The wheelers were the coach's anchor, and an anchor that stands honest is worth 2 men with ropes. Barley shifted his weight over his 4 feet, blew once at the snow wall, pricing it, and stood. Then she took the first shovel herself. They dug by lamplight, turn and turn about, throwing the snow back and downwind where the wind would carry the spill away instead of handing it back. Edgar dug the deep face, being the heavier. His shoulders were worth 2 of hers, and she said so. He answered, puffing and streaming, and happier than she had yet seen a duke look, that here at last was a chamber where his weight told. She cut the sides clean and true, and cut them narrow, no wider than a led horse, because a ragged cut falls in on itself, and a clean one stands, and every foot of extra width is another minute off the horses. She trod the floor of it hard as she went. The cold got past gloves and lodged in the fingers and would not be shaken out. Twice she stopped and made him beat his arms while she walked the leaders herself. Once she went back and put her bare palm under Barley's rug, flat against his shoulder, to be sure the standing had put no chill in him. Edgar dug, and between spadefuls he watched her run the halt, as he had seen generals fail to run a war. The minutes. She called the quarters aloud, so the work could hear its own pace. The horses walked, rugged, felt, spoken to, each in turn. The man, put where his back was worth most, and thanked by being handed more to do. And somewhere in the 2nd quarter hour it came to him, leaning streaming on the shovel, that he had held offices with seals on them and been of less use in his whole life than he had been since midnight. The offices had come with bows. This had come with a shovel, and he knew which of them he would keep. "You're smiling, Your Grace," she said, coming past with the lantern. "The bank will cure that. I am adding up my career, Miss Sowden. The sum is smaller than the drift." "The drift is getting smaller," she said. "Dig. How do you reckon your 20 minutes? By a church clock in your head? By the horses." She threw a spadeful, trod the cut, threw another. A rugged wheeler standing quiet is good for half an hour before the cold gets under the rug. Past that, I'm spending tomorrow's horse to buy tonight's road, and that's poor trade on any road going. And where do we stand? "Inside the half hour," said Kitty, "if you dig faster." They were 6 feet into the 12 when the lights came up the road behind. 2 lamps, swinging, and the sound of a coach taking the long pull steady. Then the high flyer came out of the dark into their light. Maddox on the box, his own team smoking, 2 of his yard lads up behind with shovels showing over the rail. He brought his coach to a stand behind the mail. For a moment, the 2 boxes looked at one another down the lamplight, and the wind did all the talking. Then Maddox climbed down heavy, took a shovel off his own coach, and sent his 2 lads down with theirs, walked into the cut she had made, looked at the clean sides of it a moment, and dug. He dug unasked, and he dug well, and he said one thing only the whole time, to nobody in particular, between throws. "Followed your track from the quarry gate. Roads opening behind you." After that it was 5 shovels working the one narrow face, and the work went forward at better than twice the pace. Kitty left the man his silence to work in, since it was plainly hard enough on him without an audience. The passage went through inside the half hour. The lip of the drift came down in a last soft roar, and the far road showed black and scoured beyond, swept by the same wind that had built the wall. Then they widened the cut by only as much as the wheels required. She led the male's leaders through the cut herself, brought the coach after on the wheelers alone. She put them to again with Edgar holding lamps and bars, then went down the team once more, her fingers past feeling, and her voice kept easy for the horses' sake. Maddox stood at his own leaders' heads and watched the mail made ready, and when she went up the wheel to the box, he took his pipe out of his mouth. "High flyer's a day coach," he said. "I'll bring her up by daylight, on your road." A pause, the length of a swallowed thing. "Mind the church at Hag's Turn. The glaze starts level with the churchyard wall." "I'll mind it," said Kitty, and sprang the team, and the mail went through the scar and out onto the high moor, with the wind astern for the first time all night, shoving hard at the boot. The summit gate stood open, snowed to its hinges, and the wind through the gateway was a scream on one long note. Then they were through it and past the crest stones, and the scream stopped. It stopped so completely that both of them ducked, as if silence was shot. The squall had blown itself out against the far side of the bank. The sky tore open overhead from west to east, and the night went suddenly, savagely clear, a great iron frost, and every star out to the last and smallest, burning steady. "Halt here," she said after the team, and they stood steaming. Below them lay the north. Moonlight got up off the snow until the whole country gave more light than the sky. Fell after fell laid out white and blue shadowed, the dales running down black between, a river showing in bends of dull silver, and far off, small and orange and brave, the lamps of the towns the mail was for. "Chain first," said Kitty, because her father's daughter said it before anything else got said. She came down, and Edgar came down after. Between them, on her instruction, and by his strength, they rough-locked the near hind wheel. The chain went over the wheel rim, through the spokes, and was drawn hard to the staple and checked twice. A wheel chained that way cannot turn. It can only skid, and the skid is what holds a coach back on a hill. Then they hung the drag shoe on its hook under the boot, where one pull would bring it down ready. She breathed the team and eased the wheeler's pole chains, a link for the descent. Barley bumped her shoulder with his big Roman nose and began working at the strings of her hood with his lips, an old crime from his bucket days, and she leaned on him a moment, just a moment, with the stars on both of them. Edgar stood by the forewheel and learned that rest is work, and the woman laughing quietly at a horse eating her hood strings had been written off by half a county's coachman. He had been in the room for it. He intended to be in the room for the apology. The waiting was needful. Horses must breathe before a descent. That is craft, and it is law. She fetched the box seat bag and went down the row, giving all four a handful of oats, Barley last and longest, and the two of them stood at the forewheel in the enormous silence with the north lying at their feet. "I have owned land in this country all my life," Edgar said, his voice strange and close after 5 hours of roaring. "I have seen it from every window I own. I have never once seen it." "You're seeing it from the box," she said. "The country was here all along, Your Grace. It only wanted the seat." He was quiet a while. She pulled her glove off and went down the row, laying her bare palm on each chest for the heat under it, standing at each head while the great lungs slowed. A blown horse put at a glazed descent is an accident already happened. Far below, a farm dog barked at the moon and thought better of it. "They tell me I was born to all this," he said. "I was born beside it. My brother was born to it. Then one bad January made me Garrowdale, and every man who had talked over my head began talking at my boots instead. He turned the horn bracketward with one finger, a man fiddling to keep his voice level. So when Tansy said his sentence tonight, I knew what I was hearing. I thought, she shall have a witness, at the least. The rest I have learned on the road since. The rest, she said. That the county's coachmen are fools, he said, and that I have wasted a deal of my life indoors. He looked at her instead of the country. The moon was on her face, and the frost had put white in the fur of her hood, and she had a smear of tallow across one cheekbone from the lamp, and he chose, as a man signs his name, to go on looking. I'd call it robbery, Miss Sowden, except that robbery takes a thing away, and this was worse. They left it where you could see it every morning of your life. Every morning of my life, she agreed, and heard her own voice come out plain instead of dry. You're the first soul ever to say it aloud. I'd made sure the wanting was invisible. It seems it was only unmentioned. Kitty Sowden had an answer, and for the first time that night her hands were surer than her tongue. The minutes stood, the stars burned, the team's breath went up in one column like the smoke of a good house, and she found she had turned, and that his face was nearer than a duke's face had any business being, and that the cold had gone very local and unimportant. Your Grace, she began. The west went out. She saw it over his shoulder. The stars were going out in a swallowing line, low down, fell by fell. A wall of squall was coming in off the western sea, blind white, eating the country as it came, 20 minutes away at most, and the long steep below them lay glazed to glass under its new snow. Weather, she said, and the minute was over, and she was up the wheel, with her heart going hard for 3 reasons, and only one of them meteorological. Down the bank ahead of it. Shoe down, Your Grace. Drop it under the wheel as she rolls, and then climb up and hold very tight indeed. Ballast, said Edgar, hauling the drag shoe down into the snow. Does its finest work downhill, and swung up beside her as the coach eased forward, and the mail went over the crest of Garrow Bank, with the whole white north waiting to catch it. Downhill is where driving stops being strength and becomes religion. She had the wheelers gathered back on their haunches, deep in the breeching. The whole slow weight of coach and mails hung off those 2 broad quarters, and the chained wheel ploughed its dead furrow behind. She carried the leaders on the lightest feel in England, their traces swinging slack. There were 2 passengers with legs, in Tansy's word, kept for one use only, pointing the coach's nose where she chose, and she courted her road. That is, she kept her wheels off the crown and out of the polished tracks, out on the rough, unworn side where the surface still had some hold in it. Every mile of yard-taught dawn schooling was awake in her arms and earning its keep at last. The first pitch went by in order. The second went by in order. Her whole body listened through the leather. At Hag's Turn, the church stood up, black on their right, with its yard wall shining, and level with the wall, exactly where Maddox had put it for her. The glaze began. She felt it arrive through the reins before anything showed. A wrongness in the coach itself, a lightning, the drag of the locked wheel gone smooth and eager. The shoe had stopped biting. 60 hundredweight of coach and mail took one long silken stride sideways towards the churchyard wall. Slew, she said, conversational, because a shout on the box goes down 4 backs in half a second. Sit hard left, Your Grace. Edgar threw his weight left without one question. She gave the wheelers a half stride of their heads. That is against every instinct in the human arm, which screams to haul back, and hauling back only locks a sliding team into a sledge. Then she pointed the leaders square across the fall of the road and asked Barley. Barley leaned. The old campaigner set his near shoulder against the slide as he had set it against 200 winters of this same hill. He got one hind foot onto the rubble ridge at the road's crown, where the ice stood thin and held. The roan caught his sense off him a heartbeat later. The coach came round out of its slide in one long, shuddering swing, wall filling the near lamp's light and then emptying out of it, and they were pointed downhill true again, crawling, everything standing, everything whole. Kitty let out a breath that came out white and ragged. "Good lad," she called down. "Good lad, Barley." And to the man beside her, still leaning left with both hands full of rail, "You may resume being ballast, your grace. May I say, at the bottom." The long steep's last pitch was the worst of the road, and she took it by the book her father wrote. She halted at its head, on a flat where the ice gave out. She came down, went over the team's legs with the lantern, and set Edgar to the second chain. The off-hind wheel this time, rough-locked to match its fellow. Both wheels were dead now, and the coach was a stone sledge with the wheelers for its conscience. "Walk on the uphill side of the near wheel," she told him, "and keep several good feet between yourself and the tire. Carry the spare chain trailing from your hands, never over your shoulder. A chain on a man's shoulder that catches takes the man with it. If the shoe skates again on this pitch, I'll sing out, and you'll cast the loose end into the road ahead of the tire and jump clear before it bites. A running tire keeps whatever it is given, on my word and my word only." "On your word," said the Duke of Garrowdale, and took up the chain, and walked down the steepest quarter-mile in the north abreast of the near wheel of the King's Mail, and clear of it, in a borrowed coat, watching a woman's right hand for his orders. Halfway down, the shoe found glass again. The coach surged, silken and hateful. The wheelers went back on their haunches till their breeching straps sang. Kitty Sowden read the slide in its first foot and called, "Clear down the cold. Now, your grace." He cast the loose end into the road ahead of the tire, and was clear before it moved. The wheel ran onto it and bit iron on stone. The coach checked with a jolt that clapped every buckle on the team. Then, slow and grinding, in a shower of blue sparks, the mail came down the last of the pitch at the pace of a funeral, and the safety of one. It rolled out onto the easing grade below, where the snow began again to fall. Fat and idle and beaten, they unchained at the milestone by lantern light, both of them clumsy-fingered, and there is a kind of tiredness that sits next to laughing, and they were in it. "You may say it now," she said, working the chain hook loose. "Whatever it was you began at the church, only that I have sat through 10 years of maiden speeches in the Lords," said Edgar, "and now, your grace, is the finest thing anybody has said to me in a public capacity. It was an order, your grace." "I know it was an order. Nobody gives me orders. It turns out I take them beautifully. This has been a great night for discoveries." The squall found them at last on the low road, where it was only snow on flat ground, and the team swung on towards the smell of a change and a fire. Dawn came grey and slow rising as the walls closed in again by the Crossgate turnpike. The gate lamps showed through the falling white. Beside them stood the relief guard for the northern stage, muffled to the eyes, stamping, his watch in his fist. Kitty put out her hand to the horn in its bracket. Then she stopped and gave it to the Duke. "Announce us, your grace." Edgar of Garrowdale set the mail horn to his lips and produced a sound with a dying goose at one end of it and a small war at the other. The leaders bolted 2 strides in pure horror. The gatekeeper came out of his door at a run with his nightcap on. Edgar lowered the horn, examined it with the gravity of a man betrayed by an ally, and tried again, and the second attempt had all the faults of the first, with a new one over. Kitty Sowden began to laugh. It came up out of the whole night. The scar, the church wall, the singing breeching straps. It took her by the ribs and shook her, and she laughed with tears freezing on her lashes, while she brought the team dancing to the gate. The Duke, wounded, blew a third blast worse than both together, and the relief guard stood in the road with his watch out, shouting through the snow the only sentence the night had left wanting. "Mails on time. Who in God's name is blowing it?" The bags and boxes went over, seals shown, waybill signed, the bank bills and the soldiers' remittances, and the lovesick clerks of Lancashire away north on fresh wheels before the light was full. The last they saw of the mail was its lamps swinging out through the gate, and the relief guard's horn, blown properly and with a flourish of pointed instruction, dying away up the Carlisle road. "In my defence," said Edgar, "the instrument is damaged." "The instrument is frightened," said Kitty, and turned her tired team for home. At the gate inn they did the yard's due, and she would let neither hunger nor a duke hurry it. The team came out of harness steaming, and all 4 were rubbed down hard, with wisps of hay twisted tight and worked against the lie of the coat till the skin dried under it. Legs were felt from knee to hoof. Rugs went on. Then came the hot mash, bran and crushed oats with the steam standing off the buckets, and Barley with his whole face in his, and one ear still turned to her voice. Edgar rubbed down the roan under instruction, was told by the gate inn's ostler that his grace made a fair stableman for a beginner, and looked better pleased over that than over anything ever said to him indoors. Only when the last bucket was empty did they sit down, and Kitty found that her fingers would not close round the cup. They had held 4 mouths all night and dug 12 feet of snow, and they had finished with her. Edgar made no speech about it. He put the mug into the middle of her palms and folded them round it, one hand and then the other, and held them there till the heat got in. She slept before it was cool, sitting up, under his coat, and he did not call it a claim, and she did not take it for one. They slept 2 hours in chairs by the gate inn fire, bolt upright and respectable, and came back over the bank in the late morning, on their own road. The drift was cut to a doorway now, the steep gritted by the tollmen, the day blue and blinding. 6 hours of war by night had gone over to an hour and a half of shining quiet. The road had talked ahead of them, gate to gate, faster than they had driven it. They came under the arch at noon, and the yard was full, and the taproom emptied into it before the wheels stopped turning. The thin gentleman, whose bills had gone to Carlisle after all, began a sort of speech, and was drowned out. The postboys touched the coach as it passed, reverent, one after the other, as pilgrims touch a shrine, and Mrs. Sowden stood in the doorway of the Swan, with her hands rolled in her apron. Kitty came down off the box, weary and filthy and glorious, and was gathered in, muffler and all. Over her mother's shoulder she saw the settle carried to the door, with Tansy propped on it, tears running frank into his stubble. "I heard the change bell go," he said, "and I said to the kitchen, that's a Sowden's rate of coming home." The glaze began level with the church wall, where Maddox said, she told him, kneeling by the settle still in her gloves, because he would want the road before he wanted the glory. The shoe skated at Hag's Turn. Barley took the slide out of it, and we rough-locked both hind wheels for the last pitch and walked her down on the chains. Both wheels, said Tansy, tasting it. Aye, that's the bank's price on glass. And your time? On the bill to the minute. 25 years. I heard her father say those words in that doorway, said Tansy, to the yard at large, in a voice gone suddenly disgraceful. And I have lived to hear them twice. The high flyer stood loading in the second yard, bound north. Maddox came across the cobbles through the watching crowd, took his hat off, and stood bareheaded in front of the innkeeper's daughter in her father's coat. I've driven that bank 30 years in all weathers, and what you brought down it last night, I'd have sworn on my license to be past doing, he said. I'll be telling it in every tap room from here to Setterby, and telling it right. You dug well, said Kitty, which between Coachman is a paragraph, and Maddox put his hat back on and went north. Inside, the whole house crowding after, Mrs. Sowden took the whip from her daughter's hand. She hung it back on its 2 iron hooks under the boastboard. Then, while the room watched, she fetched the little pot of black paint and the fine brush from behind the till, dragged a stool over, and climbed up unassisted at 4.50. And she painted, in a careful, unpractised hand, a second line beneath her husband's sentence, and once by Kitty Sowden's hand. There, she said, coming down. Now the board's honest, and the inn is open, and everybody staring may buy their dinner. The thaw came in the last week of the month. The roads opened and the stranded went their ways, the thin gentleman leaving a guinea for the postboys and his compliments to the establishment's whip. The world resumed. The Duke of Garrowdale stayed. He sent for a portmanteau. He engaged his rooms by the month. When asked, he offered 3 reasons in a fortnight: the North Road, the drains at Setterby, and his physician's opinion of mountain air. The kitchen graded each excuse below the last, and laid quiet money on the truth. He courted her the only way she could have borne, which was by being of use in plain sight. He learned the Swan. He carried, hauled, mended. He stood at the change with a watch, and learned why 50 seconds is a matter of pride. He sat with Tansy, whose hands came back slowly through a mutinous itching spring, all but one fingertip, and was taught harness on a bench, buckle by buckle, till the old coachman pronounced him fit to be trusted with leather. He put his own money quietly into the county subscription for the toll road gritting, and his own back loudly into the March flood when the beck came up through the cellar. The yard, which had voted for him since the night he took the heavy end of the settle, confirmed him. The coffee room despaired of him. The county talked, the Duke at a posting inn, the girl who drove the mail, what his mother would have said. And it got the same answer all over the Swan, a shrug, and the price of dinner. She found him one April morning, mending the hinge of Barley's half-door, sleeves turned back, and stood watching a duke drive a screw with his tongue between his teeth. "Your Grace has been the best part of 3 months at a coaching inn," she said. "The drains at Setterby must be in a poor way." "Ruinous," he said, sighting along the hinge. "I expect to be detained all summer." "They'll be talking of it in the county." "They are talking of it in the Lords," he said. "I had a letter Tuesday asking whether I'd taken up the coaching trade. I replied that I was studying under the finest whip in the north and had hopes, in time, of the parcels run. Tansy says with 10 years' application you might make an offside man. Tansy said 5 to my face. Tansy, said Kitty, is a flatterer with dukes and a coachman with me, and you may decide for yourself which of us gets the truth. And what does Barley say to me? Barley has been bribed with carrots past all testimony, and well you know it, because I have seen the state of your pockets. A man courts the whole household, said Edgar, unashamed. She laughed, and then heard the thing under the laugh, and made herself say it, because she was her mother's daughter, as well as her father's, and the Swan's people faced their accounts. Edgar. First time. His given name stood in the yard air between them, and his hands went still on the door. It is a long way from this yard to Garrowdale. Your people wear silk on Tuesdays. I smell of neatsfoot and bran. My mother pulls ale, and every dowager in 3 counties will say the Duke of Garrowdale was snowed in at a posting inn and lost his wits to the landlady's daughter. He set the screwdriver down, came and stood square in front of her, and took both her hands, glove and bare, and held them up a little between them, as evidence. The box seat goes to whoever the horses trust, and the horses had decided years ago, he said. Your father's yard knew it before you were 10. The mail knows it. Every soul on the bank that night knows it. It only wants the county taught, and I am a very patient teacher with a loud title. Garrowdale is a seat, Kitty. Men are shuffled in and out of seats by what they were born, and I have hated it all my life. And here stands the one person I ever met that a seat came to honestly, by the hands, in the weather, in front of witnesses. He drew breath. Marry me. Keep your roads. Drive to Garrowdale on our wedding day, with your mother's blessing and your father's whip, and let the dowagers say what they like at the pace they can manage, which by my observation is a walk. The team's heads had come over the half-doors down the row, ears pricked at the pair standing so still in a working morning. Barley leaned out, got his lips into Edgar's hair, and pulled, once, hopeful and rude. There's your county's verdict, said Kitty, unsteady, laughing, her hands turning in his and gripping. Yes, since you ask it in the yard, in daylight, before witnesses. Yes, Edgar. Yes at the walk. Yes at the trot. And yes down the long steep, with both wheels chained. Your mother must paint a 3rd line, he said, unsteady himself now. And she taught a duke to be useful. For that one, said Kitty, she'll want gold leaf. He kissed her then, between the stables and the pump, to a burst of entirely unprofessional cheering from the hayloft door, and Barley, deprived of the hair, blew a long, wet judgment over the pair of them and went back to his hay. I warn you, she said, against the frieze of his coat. The county will call it a 9 days' wonder. The county is welcome. I have done the arithmetic, and a marriage holds a great many 9 days. And when the dowagers come at me at the walk, spring the team, said Edgar, and take the bank. On the eve of the wedding, in the parlour with the dress hanging on the door, Kitty asked her mother the question she had carried since the winter. 20 years, he told me. The box was for my own good, and you held your peace. Then Tansy said one sentence, and you crossed that room before it finished landing. Why that night, mother? Mrs. Sowden went on with her hem a moment. Because he asked me to, she said. His last winter. He said, if the road ever wants her while I'm above ground, keep her by the fire, love. But if the road wants her after, the whip's behind the bar, and you'll know the night when it comes. She bit her thread. It took me 2 years to forgive him for leaving me the deciding of it. Then the mail came in wrong, and Tansy said his sentence, and there was your face over that spoon. There was very little deciding in it by then. Mostly it was walking. They were married in June, in the small church at the Dale foot, with the doors open on green weather, and half the road trade of the north crowded into the back pews, smelling of saddle soap and Sunday. Mrs. Sowden gave her daughter away. She had armed the girl once this year, she said, and would finish what she started. She came up the aisle in grey silk, with her chin at the angle it had held crossing the taproom with the whip, and put Kitty's hand into Edgar's, and said, "Clear enough for the back pews. Mind, she comes with a team." "I'll take the whole string, ma'am," said Edgar. "You'll take her word on a road," said Mrs. Sowden. "That's the vow under the vow. I learnt it on the bank, ma'am, at the second attempt." "Then you'll keep," she said, and went to her pew with her handkerchief out and her head high. Tansy sat mended in the second pew and sang the psalm in a voice trained on the horn. Afterwards, in the churchyard, he claimed his fee. "One last stage," he said, standing by the wedding coach with his hat in his hands and his old gloves on. "You'll allow a man his retirement in style." So it was Tansy on the box of the flowered coach out of the churchyard, 30 years of the king's mail sitting up as straight as his frost-nipped joints allowed, and the new Duchess of Garrowdale beside him in her wedding dress. At the halfway milestone, by an arrangement nobody had heard them make, Tansy brought the team down to a steady walk, and without stopping he laid the reins into her hands in their proper order. "Wrists down, my lady," said Tansy, settling back, 30 years of the box in the words. "Aye, you'll do. You had a good master." "I had two. You had two," he agreed, "and the first of them is watching, if the next world keeps any road sense at all, and I'd back him to find the box seat of it." So it was Kitty who drove her own wedding coach up the last of the road to Garrowdale, her husband riding inside with the window down, shouting up unhelpful directions in the character of a nervous passenger, and Tansy beside her pretending it was the wind in his eyes. The new order of the world buckled itself in by Michaelmas, quiet and snug and working. The Swan stayed her mother's and throve. Garrowdale's custom went through its yard. The London coaches learned that the change under the bank was the fastest in the north, and the mash the hottest, and Mrs. Sowden ruled it all from behind the boastboard with its 2 painted lines. The mail contractor entered Kitty Sowden on the relief list for Garrow Bank, and the post office surveyor's certificate hung beside the Swan's boastboard. At Garrowdale, the Duchess kept her own team in her own stable block and drove her own roads in all weathers, to the physician's alarm and the Dales' lasting entertainment. The county came to call in the first month, braced for a landlady's daughter, and met a straight-backed young woman who talked horses with the husbands and prices with the wives, and proved alarmingly difficult to condescend to, particularly at a trot. Edgar gave one standing order the first week, and gave it aloud to the steward in the hall. "Post it here and in the stables both. No traveller, of whatever condition, is ever to be turned from Garrowdale's door in weather. If it costs, it costs. I was a stranded man myself at an inn under Garrow Bank, and it made my whole fortune." The order stood for the rest of his life. The bell pull by the gate lodge got a lamp above it, kept lit October to April, and the Dale learned to call a hard night a Garrowdale night, meaning windows left burning to be seen from the fell road. In the best paddock, the south one with the chestnut tree and the view of the road, Barley grazed out his pension, gone stout and mightily pleased with himself. There was a brass plate on his gate, polished by the stable lads because they chose to. It said, "Barley, Nearside Wheeler." He held. The first heavy snow of the next winter came on a Friday in December, and the Duchess of Garrowdale was at the Swan when it came, taking tea in her mother's parlour, with her boots drying at the fire. She heard the North Mail before the yard bell rang it. 4 horses at the swing. The horn's 3 notes flung ahead through the thickening white, the change running out with the fresh team, 50 seconds pride on every man. Old music. She went out with her tea in her hand to hear it. The trouble stood at the head of the fresh leaders. The male's regular whip was laid up at Setterby with a broken collarbone. In his place, they had sent a lad of maybe 19, capable on a plain evening, and he stood looking up the road at the bank, with his face the colour of the sky. The male's own guard checked his watch at the rear, entirely satisfied with his own arrangements. The lad pulled his gloves on and pulled them off, and the whole yard saw the knight standing on his chest. Kitty Sowden looked at the road. She looked at the boy. She set down the teacup on the mounting block. "How long on the mail?" she said to him kindly, already unpinning her good hat. "Second year, my lady, ma'am." He settled on all three. "Second year on the north run." "Well then, there are men warm at fires the length of this road, who swore the bank was past my doing, and they were wrong, and you'll hear how wrong as we go. One stage. You'll ride behind, watch the line I take, and bring the north mail through yourself next change. The bank can be learned. I had it whole by your age, and I'd had it from a book called My Father. And lad, the fear's the right start. It keeps your hands soft. Mother, my father's coat and the whip." Mrs. Sowden was already indoors reaching for the hooks. "And I'll warm your bricks," she called back, in the voice of a woman who had given up arguing with weather 30 years since. "My lady," the lad managed from beside the wheel, "is it true what they tell of the night the mail went up in the great snow?" "You'll hear it from the box," said the Duchess. "It improves with weather." The yard moved around the coach, rugs and lamps and hot bricks handed up, and the Duchess of Garrowdale came out in the old caped box coat, drawing on her gloves. She went up the wheel of the King's mail as her own mother held the near lamp high. Out of the tap room, shrugging into his greatcoat, unasked, unhurried, certain of his seat, came the Duke. He climbed up beside her, and the young driver, scrambling up behind to watch and learn, saw a duke tie his hat on with string, unasked and expert. "Your Grace means to come, then," she said, gathering the reins into her left hand, feeling down the leather for 4 fresh mouths in the falling snow. "My wife is taking my mail over Garrow Bank," said Edgar. "Where else in England would I be sitting? It will be cold, Your Grace. It was cold the first time. I have rarely been warmer in my life. And the lad rides behind." "Then the lad," said the Duke over his shoulder, "may watch and learn what I learned on this road. Sit where you're trusted and be useful there. Then you know your duties." To the letter. Behind them the guard took his proper station, and the horn with it, at which instrument the Duke had, after a year of tuition, risen very nearly to mediocrity. "Sit still, hold tight. The box goes to whoever the horses trust, and you, Your Grace, may hold tight and be ballast," said the Duchess of Garrowdale, and sprang the team. The mail went out under the arch with the horn sounding and the snow beginning in earnest. The lamps of the Swan burning yellow behind it, and the boastboard hanging true over the bar with its 2 painted lines. And the last the yard saw was the coach leaning into the first of the long pull, 4 dark horses driving into the white, a man and a woman shoulder to shoulder on the box, going up into the weather together, as though the weather had asked them personally. The mail always went through from the Swan. That was the story of Kitty Sowden, the innkeeper's daughter who took the King's mail over Garrow Bank, and Edgar, the Duke who climbed up beside her into the snow. A story about a skill kept waiting in the yard for 20 years, and the one night it was finally handed the reins. Be honest, inside the warm coach, or up on the box in the snow, where would you ride? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. If Kitty and Edgar kept you company tonight, a like helps more than you know. and subscribe so you'll be here when the next Duke's secret comes to light. Wrap up warm, and I'll see you on the next road.